We said a self-evident truth is something that is true by default. Now, it doesn't mean self-evident truths are always going to be the same. They may change. I'm up to that kind of scenario, right? Self-evident truths may change over time. However, the default position is when something is true by default, you accept it unless there's direct evidence to challenge it. Okay? Now, one may ask, Hamza's making this up, man. He's making this up. He's playing trickery, creating this idea of self-evident truth in order to fudge God into the equation, right? What is this self-evident truth? He's making it up just so he could create some kind of fake confidence in Muslims. Hold on a second. Let's turn down the arrogance knob a little bit. Self-evident truths permeate every single field of philosophy, science, mathematics, Western thought. Let me repeat. The idea of things being true by default, things being self-evidently true, permeate all aspects of thinking, even science itself. I know. I just finished studying 2 postgraduate degrees in philosophy, and we did philosophy of science, we did philosophy of psychology, we did the philosophy of language. We did all of these things, and I'm telling you, you would realize that there are things that are considered true by default, that don't need any proof, that they start with in order to develop their knowledge further. Take, for example, my specialist module called The Idea of Freedom. It was political philosophy. And we had a postgraduate discussion. In the seminar period, you have discussions with your fellow postgrads, and you have a bit of a debate and a discussion. And the discussion was on the idea of hurriya, freedom, right? And there was 2 opinions. That freedom is intrinsic, meaning you don't need any evidence that freedom is like a virtue, something that we should work towards. But others said, no, freedom is only good because it's instrumental. It's a means to an end. So some philosophers would argue freedom is an end. Others would argue it's a means to an end. And I asked the question, because the majority of them believe that freedom has intrinsic value, meaning it's an end, it's not just a means. And therefore it doesn't really need proof from that point of view because it's intrinsically valuable. So I said to them, well, how do you know? Well, he said, well, for me to start to prove it means that freedom is not intrinsically valuable anymore. I said, yeah, but you must have a basis for this. And this is what the professor, the academic said. He said, it's based on our intuitions. And then I said to him, really? And he replied, what else do we have? His intuition. His intuition, fair enough. But the point I'm trying to say, even in political philosophy, things like freedom and other concepts and ideas are based on what they would consider true by default. That trusting your intuition is true by default from this point of view. Take, for example, things in the philosophy of science. If you study the philosophy of science, for some conceptions of the scientific method, you have to have something that you believe to be true by default. What is that thing? That the real world exists. This bottle really exists. It's outside of my head. This bottle is not just an idea here, it's outside of my head. I'm touching it and I'm feeling it. You have to start with that position, because after all, there is no real proof that this bottle is external to my brain. But you'd be like, but I can see it, bro. And you can touch it and feel it. Fair enough, but it could just be all an idea in my head. Maybe my mind is on planet Mars, and there are metal probes in my brain, and there's an alien making me think and feel what I'm thinking and feeling now. I don't know if you guys ever watched the film The Matrix. Maybe we're in the Matrix, right? What are you going to take, the blue pill or the red pill? The point I'm trying to say here is they have to work with that true by default assumption, the self-evident truth that the external world exists. Not only that, in the philosophy of science, and you could read this for yourself, a true by default self-evident truth is that external causal connections exist. So there are things that happen in the world and they're causally connected. Another true by default assumption or self-evident truth in the philosophy of science is that nature is uniform. Nature is uniform. Like if you see a certain pattern, it's more likely to repeat itself across reality. So the point is, there are self-evident truths in philosophy of politics, in philosophy of science. Also, even in metaphysics, the idea that we have minds. Do you have a mind, bro? Do you have a mind? You think so? Well, the minute you say, I think, you have a mind, right? You must have a mind. So this guy has a mind. I want him to prove to us he has a mind. How do we know you're not just a zombie, bro, that you've been programmed biologically like this?
I think, therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am. But maybe you've been programmed to say, I think, therefore I am. Do I have another mind? Do I have a mind?
I know.
The point is, we all believe that we all have minds, right? But we don't have any what you would call absolute proof that this guy is really a human being with another mind. He may be just a biological zombie, and I'm the only one with a mind. This is called solipsism, right? The point I'm trying to say here is, we use that as an assumption. In metaphysics, when you're studying consciousness, right, you assume everyone has minds. And you take that as true by default. So the point I'm trying to say here, brothers and sisters, is that this idea of self-evident truth, this idea of being true by default, is not something I've made up. It exists everywhere. Everywhere. In science, in politics, in philosophy, in mathematics even. If you study, for example, the philosophy of mathematics, when they do set theory or calculus, there is an assumption that they believe is true by default. What's that assumption? Infinity exists. No evidence. They just say it exists. They have to start with that in order to have their mathematical knowledge. So don't think this is just Muslims trying to grasp our intellectual straws. It exists everywhere. Self-evident truths, things being true by default, things having assumptions, exist everywhere. So, when someone challenges that there are human beings with no minds, and they are the only ones with a mind, they're challenging a self-evident truth. So they have to give us evidence. If someone, for example, challenges that the real world exists, and it's external to our minds, we're not going to sit there starting to prove that the real world actually does exist. We're going to ask them, where is their evidence? So when someone challenges a self-evident truth, the onus of proof is on them. Now there are 4 characteristics of self-evident truths. Listen to this very carefully. 4 characteristics. Characteristic number 1, it is universal. It is not a product of a particular culture, and it is cross-cultural. For example, the idea that the past was once the present, the idea that the past existed, is not a product of one culture. For example, you don't find a tribe in, say, Kenya only having this idea, and the origin is just from that tribe, and everyone else disagrees with them, or they borrowed knowledge just from that tribe. When we look cross-culturally, we understand that there is pattern going on, that people actually believe that the past did exist. It's not based on a specific culture. It doesn't mean everyone has to agree with this, of course not. But it's not from a particular culture, it's cross-cultural. Characteristic of a self-evident truth number 2. It's not based on information transfer. It's not acquired via knowledge external to your introspection and external to your senses. For example, I believe the past was once the present. I believe the past was real. I never learnt this at home. I never learnt this at school. When was the last time you went into school, primary school, secondary school, college, university, whatever, and you sit down and the teacher says to you, Hamza, today's lesson is going to be on that yesterday was real. Yesterday once happened, Hamza. 2 weeks ago once happened. It was real. It was once the present. Right? You don't learn that at school, do you? Who learns that at school? Nobody. Because it's true by default. You acquire it via your own senses and your own introspection. So things being true by default, things being self-evidently true, are not based on information transfer. No one teaches it to you. You don't acquire this externally. Rather, you acquire it within yourself, introspection and your senses. The third characteristic of a self-evident truth, it is natural. It is formed due to the natural functioning of the human psyche. Meaning, it is the most kind of direct appreciation of reality. Our psychological disposition almost immediately appreciates it. The fourth and final characteristic of a self-evident truth is that it is intuitive. What do I mean by this? I mean it is the easiest, most simple, and comprehensive explanation. I repeat, the fourth characteristic of things being self-evidently true is that they are intuitive. They are the easiest, most simple, and comprehensive explanation of reality. For example, when someone denies the past, that it never existed, we just were created 5 minutes ago with all of these memories, that is not a simple explanation of reality, right? It is not the easiest explanation of reality, and it's not the most comprehensive. Why? Because it raises far more questions than you can solve. Because you now have to deny your own psychological disposition, you have to deny your own personal and social experiences, you have to deny all of these memories that you have in your head. So it being intuitive, a self-evident truth has to be intuitive from the point of view that it's the most easiest, simple, and comprehensive explanation of reality. Because things that deny self-evident truths, they're not simple. They create far more questions, right? If I were to say, I'm the only one with a mind in this room, that's not an easy, simple, and comprehensive explanation. Because now I have to justify why you don't have a mind, and you don't have a mind, and you don't have a mind. It creates far more problems than it solves. So those are the 4 key characteristics of self-evident truths. Let's apply these 4 key characteristics on the existence of a creator. Let's see if it works. Let's see if a creator, the idea of a creator is a self-evident truth. It's true by default. And by the way, when I say a creator here, I'm meaning the basic underlying concept of a creator. The basic underlying concept of a creator, that things require causal conditions. Things require prior causal conditions. I'm not talking about God and His name is Allah and one of His names is Al-Wadud and Ar-Rahman. No, we need revelation for this, right? We need revelation for this. What I'm talking about is the basic underlying concept of a creator, that things require causal conditions, prior causal conditions. So let's apply this idea of self-evident truths, the 4 characteristics of self-evident truths, to God Himself, the underlying basic concept of God. Number 1, is the creator of the heavens and the earth a creator, a universal truth? Yes or no? Of course it is. I don't care if there's 500 million atheists in the world or 1 billion atheists in the world. This is not a consensus, right? It's not a popularity vote. When we talk about something being universal, we're not saying every single human being agrees with this. No. We already defined it. We're saying it's not the product of one specific culture. The existence of a creator and even the idea of things requiring causes is everywhere. It's cross-cultural. Things requiring prior causal conditions, things requiring a creator, something coming to effect as a result of a causal condition or a creative power. This idea is cross-cultural. It doesn't belong to the Chinese. It doesn't belong to the Arabs. It doesn't belong to the Scandinavian people. It doesn't belong to us Brits. It's cross-cultural. So far so good. 1 out of 4. Second characteristic. Let's apply this to God. The basic underlying concept of God. Untaught. Is the basic underlying concept of God, as we just discussed, untaught? Of course it is. I'm telling you, I never went to school, college or university, and one of the teachers, professors or academics came up to me and said, Hamza, when you push this bottle, it's going to move or fall, because there is such a thing as cause and effect. For it to fall, there must have been the prior causal condition of your hand moving. that causal connection, right, wasn't taught to me. It was based on my introspection and my experiences as a human being. When I heard a noise, I know it's as a result of something. Either someone knocking something down, the wind moving, something happened for there to be a noise. When we hear knocks on the door as children, we know it's as a result of someone knocking the door, something knocking the door, or an accident, or someone throwing a pebble. Whatever the case may be, we know that it's based on prior causal conditions. The effect required some type of cause. And when we see things come into existence that we've never seen before, we immediately say that that had some kind of creative power behind it. I passed a few roundabouts coming to Cambridge, and if I saw an arrangement of flowers that said, "I love you," I'm going to obviously come to the conclusion there must have been some kind of creative power. It could have even been the wind. Let's even say it could have been, some kind of random hypothesis like, it was the wind doing it, which is obviously ridiculous, but it was something. The idea here is there is some kind of innate logical formula in our minds that when we see things come into existence or things have some kind of formulation, that we know there are prior causal conditions or prior causal power or prior creative power. We don't learn this at school. It's based on our introspection and our direct experiences. So it's not based on external knowledge. 2 out of 4 so far. Let's go to the third one. It's natural. The basic idea of a creator is based on the normal functioning psychology of a human being, right? So the underlying basic concept of a creator, things requiring causes, is based on the natural functioning of a human being. Our psychology accepts this. It's a direct appreciation of reality. And here's the proof. When you study philosophy and people even deny causality, they have to write a hell of a lot. And they have to be very convincing. That's the proof that it's not a natural product of the human being. You have to really do some intellectual gymnastics to try and prove, well, that's not really cause and effect. Because there are some who believe that cause and effect doesn't really exist, right? It doesn't really exist. This is a huge topic in metaphysics. In actual fact, they haven't solved the problem on causality, right? But the underlying concept is there. The underlying concept is there. So, it's a natural product. It's a product of a natural functioning of the human psyche. So I would say believing in causes and effects, things require prior causal conditions, prior creative power. This is part of a natural functioning human psyche. So 3 out of 4. Last one. Intuitive. Is a creator, a cause, a prior creative power the most simple, easiest and comprehensive explanation for reality? Absolutely. Think about it. If I said there was a creator that created the whole universe, right? It's simple. One creator, right? Create the whole universe. Simple. It's easy to understand. Yep, there was a prior creative power. And it's very comprehensive. It answers the questions. For example, why are we here? Why is reality the way that it is? Why is there something rather than nothing? If you remove the creator out of the equation, you have so many questions you can't answer. Because you have to fall back on another position, which is, well, this whole universe came from nothing. Right? Which creates far more problems than it solves. So what you should understand by now, brothers and sisters and friends, is that the existence of God, the underlying concept of a creator, is a self-evident truth, which means it's true by default. So when someone wants to challenge a self-evident truth, who has to bring the proof? The one who's challenging a self-evident truth? Or the one who's listening to the challenge? So who has to bring the proof? The one who challenges a self-evident truth. So the next time you hear on YouTube, that you hear on Google, or see on Google, that you hear at school, university, or you read in the popular magazines and books, the question, does God exist? Know for sure that that is not the default position. The default position is that the creator exists If you deny this, you're denying a self-evident truth, and the one who denies a self-evident truth, the onus of proof is on them. You're turning the tables. This doesn't mean we don't have evidence. Of course we have evidence. But it shows that we have the strongest intellectual position of starting with certainty, and the strongest intellectual position that our ideas and concepts are true by default. They're self-evidently true. So to challenge them, the one who's making the challenge needs to bring the evidence. Does this make sense? Please apply this in your life. Personally, to resolve any doubts, and also socially when you articulate a compassionate and intelligent case for Islam to the wider community. Because one of our biggest problems when it comes to the atheist and skeptic movement is that we fall for the trap. Oh my God, I need to bring all this evidence. Hold on a second. Question the question. Question the question. Ask them. That's a valid question. But let me humbly ask you this. If you challenge the self-evident truth, and there are many self-evident truths in mathematics and philosophy and science, who do you think should be providing the evidence? You making the challenge, or the one who's listening to the challenge? It's obviously you making the challenge, because you're challenging something that is true by default. Your question about God is no different, because that basic underlying concept of a creator or a prior creative power cause is actually true by default. So the onus of proof is on you. This doesn't mean I don't have evidence, I do, but I would like to ask you, what evidence do you have to deny the divine? And this is a stronger position, much stronger position to take. It gets them to think, yeah, why am I denying the divine? Because don't forget, we believe in the Islamic tradition that the concept of God, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and believing that He deserves to be praised and worshipped, is part of who you are. It's ingrained in your fitrah. Famous hadith in the authentic narrations of Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ said that every human being is born on a state of fitrah, upon fitrah. Fatara, fatrun, fatarahu. Something has been created within us to acknowledge the divine and worship Him. And then the Prophet ﷺ taught us, however, people become Christians and other religions because of their parents. So it's the external sources that affect the fitrah. It becomes clouded. Our job is to awaken the fitrah. When we give da'wah, which means when you talk to people and engage with them so they could see the truth of Islam, our job is to awaken that truth within. We are here to awaken the truth within. This is why Ibn Taymiyyah said the affirmation of a creator is firmly rooted in the hearts of all people. It is from the binding necessities of their creation. Also, the famous scholar Al-Asfahani, he said the knowledge of Allah is firmly rooted in the soul. Al-Ghazali also said that the concept of God is part of our nature, part of our natural disposition. And this is why he, towards the end of his life, he made a beautiful point. He basically said that you only give these intellectual ideas and philosophy to someone who's already sick. You don't give medicine to someone who's okay. Because if you take medicine and you don't have an illness, it can make you sick. Right? So he said, you use this type of stuff where necessary. So from this point of view, brothers and sisters and friends, I think we can conclude that the underlying concept of God is a self-evident truth. It's true by default. And if someone basically asks the question, to turn the tables and make them understand that if they're challenging a self-evident truth, the onus of proof is on them, and make them realize that the underlying concept of God is a self-evident truth based on the 4 characteristics of self-evident truths.